Hi guys, in today's episode I'll be ranking my top 10 sports games. Now, I'm not really a big sports guy, I don't really watch a lot of sports. Occasionally I'll watch hockey, I always watch any Olympics, summer and winter. I do watch bodybuilding, but even then it's more just the Arnold Classic and typically the Olympia, and other than that it's watching clips and reading articles, typically after a contest has happened, so it's not going online and watching everything. So not a huge sports guy. So these are all going to be a little more what I would consider extreme sports, more the sort of Tony Hawk variety, the unrealistic games that are based within an actual sport rather than simulations or like the yearly terrible sports games that just 5 months later are worth $1. Nothing like that. So anyway, here are my top 10 sports games. And again, that term is a little loose here. Number 10 is Grind Session for the original PlayStation. And this is during a period where the original Tony Hawk had come out and then Tony Hawk 2 came out, and there were a lot of games that wanted to imitate that style because there were huge hits, multi-million sellers, and Grind Session was, for me, something that is the best of the imitators. It's nowhere near as good as Tony Hawk. The controls aren't quite as good, the level designs aren't quite up to par, even a lot of the tricks. It's something that feels a little bit tighter, a little bit more towards the realism. It's not quite as loose and arcadey as Tony Hawk, but it's still way beyond what would, of course, be naturally humanly capable. It's something where a lot of people bashed it, a lot of people didn't like it, but for me, it is the best of the imitators. Not as good anywhere near as the originals, as like a Tony Hawk, but for me, it's a standout of the originals and something that's definitely a hidden gem on the PS1 because not a lot of people know about it. Go check it out if you do like things like Tony Hawk, if you do like those sort of unrealistic sports games. It's something that is fairly easy to find. Go check it out and let me know what you think about it if you do see it, because it has, again, mostly negative opinions. I remember playing it with my friends a couple times and none of them liked it and they were all terrible at it, but for some reason I was pretty good at it and I think it's a big reason why I liked it. So number 10, Grind Session for the PS1. Number 9 is Rippin' Riders for the Dreamcast. This is a little bit of an SSX clone before SSX, I could say. It's alright. It's very, very good graphically. Music's pretty decent. The trick system is really good. But the overall tracks and the general selection of game modes is fairly generic. That's kind of where it falls flat. It has again, a lot of nice customization options, a lot of decent game modes, but standard game modes, and not a lot that separates it from the pack, but it's very, very solid. That's kind of what the best way I could describe this game is. It doesn't do anything to really stand out from the pack, but a lot of games will do one or two things really, really well, and then do a couple things either poorly or they'll be missing some modes that you come to expect in a certain type of game. But Rippin' Riders kind of has everything in it in a solid package that's anything but stellar, but it's still just a really, really good go-to snowboarding game that's a lot of fun for your Dreamcast. Number 8 is Sega Superstars Tennis, the Wii version here, and I know it's a little goofy, but it's still tennis, so it still counts as a sport. And I really, really enjoyed this because it mixed up a lot of the just actual tennis with a lot of very interesting sort of arcade modes, like things like a lot of party games, a lot of like the House of the Dead one where you go and have to hit balls certain ways to take down these just hordes of zombies, and lots of really cool Sega-style arcade things with lots of really, really great Sega characters. I mean, even as Knights from Knights into Dreams. And that's sort of the charm of this. I feel like without all that arcadiness put into it, without all those Sega mascots and Sega characters coming together, it wouldn't make this top 10 list. But having things like Ooh La La, having things like Knights, having things like characters like Jet Grind Radio and Sonic and all these different things in a really fun tennis game, for me, is a huge plus. It's a fun kind of party game. It's a fun arcadey style game. It's something that reminds me of the Dreamcast. If there was a Dreamcast 2, this is something that you'd find on it. I do like the Wii version because you have the choice of using either the motion controls or a Pro Controller. So depending what kind of mood you're in or what kind of gamer you are, you have options in this version, which in a lot of versions you don't. So that's really good. Sega Superstars Tennis. Number 7's an odd one because for me it's actually a big disappointment, but I still absolutely love it. And that's kind of hard to explain where it's going to be SSX 3. And for me, kind of giving away a little bit here, SSX 3 I did not like anywhere near as much as SSX 1 and 2, but I still really, really loved it. The thing I really liked about it was graphically, the presentation was fantastic. I mean, one of the best looking snowboarding games ever. For the time, it's fantastic. It even still looks really great today. A lot of the tracks are just, everything's just beautiful. It looks fantastic. I like some of the changes they made to the trick system where it's a little bit easier to land out of a huge trick. You can sort of save yourself. You can put things like really over the top. But what I didn't like about it was it lost a lot of the character and charm. It lost a lot of those over the top characters, like they're almost cartoonish in their personalities. It lost a lot of even the music in this. The soundtrack is incredibly varied and it's just absolutely massive, but there's a little bit too much focus on the sort of the radio and the tracks and the music department versus the actual gameplay. Gameplay again is still really solid and there's a few really good improvements, but instead of just having really good music to go along with it, it's a little too interactive. I just didn't like, there's too much of a focus on presentation rather than the actual gameplay. And the trick system, again, I think went a little too over the top. The first two SSX games had a really good balance where it was these ridiculous, fun, over-the-top tricks, but this just got like berserk. It went a little ballistic with some of the tricks. It was just a little bit too much, and that kind of went into the changes of the track design. I do really like the idea of having this giant open mountain. In SSX 3, you have a giant open mountain with a bunch of different tracks being sort of segments along the mountain, and a mode where you can go from the very top, the highest peak, the whole way down the mountain, which takes, like almost 20 minutes sometimes to go the whole way through that, and it's a really cool idea. And I like having that as a mode, but I don't like having that as being basically the entire game. The problem is, I really like the idea of coming the whole way down from the peak to the top. I like having the idea of being able to go around the mountain or use the ski lift to get to different courses. But then when it gets into the actual course itself, I would very much prefer it if it was more like SSX 1 and 2. The problem is that big openness continues into the actual courses where there are, some courses there's almost a dozen different ways that you can go, and it's a little too free roaming, and sometimes it can be almost difficult to find out like where you're supposed to head in a way. And I kind of like more of the streamlined design where it feels like more of a solid course, something that's very just designed to be like a one little course with a couple little like secret pathways you can take. But it doesn't feel as much of just a straightforward course. It feels a little too open with its design. And again, I love almost everything about it, but those couple of things are what keeps it down. Good enough to make it into my top 10, but not quite good enough to make it into, say, like my top 2 or 3. A really good game, but not quite as good as the first two. Number 6 actually surprised me. It was something I wanted to pick up, but I didn't realize I was going to like it as much as I ended up liking it. And that's 1080 Avalanche, a sequel to an N64 game on the GameCube that, again, like I said, really surprised me. It's a really, really solid snowboarding game. It's sort of in the same vein as something like SSX, or has a little bit more of that arcadey over the top rather than straight realism. But it does have limitations. Getting to the good, graphically, it's fantastic. It looks absolutely beautiful. It looks almost on par with SSX 3, and it came out well before it. And it has a really good system where, as you're increasing your speed and you're racing through the snow, you'll get a lot of snow and feedback like coming onto the screen. You'll get a lot of motion blur, and it feels more like you're in the game, more like you're in the environment, and it's a very beautiful effect. It's really well done. I really enjoyed it. The tracks are really well designed. There's a lot of really nice hazards. That's something where a lot of SSX didn't have quite as many destructible like hazards or things falling on you, just little like earthquakes, like really, really cool, interesting things. Some decent game modes. It's very challenging, but not over the top. It's just something where it's a level of challenge that I like. It's not super frustrating, but it's not easy, so it really keeps the experience very intense, where you really have to focus and have fun with this. And again, it has sort of all the basic game modes, but where it has issues is there are very, very few tracks. The tracks are fantastic. It has a really cool avalanche challenge where you're racing down a track with an avalanche coming behind you, and you have to sort of stay ahead of it. So you're not only trying to beat time, but you're also trying to survive this avalanche, and that's a lot of fun. Probably my favorite part of the game. But again, there are very few tracks, so you can honestly, if you're pretty good at snowboarding games, I really like snowboarding games, I've gotten pretty good at them, you can beat the majority of the game just in a couple hours. There isn't quite as much to keep you playing as in a game like SSX or even some of the old Cool Borders games, where everything that the game does have is fantastic and some of the best I've ever seen, some of the best I've ever played, but there is a very limited supply of content. Number 5 is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, the PS2 and GameCube versions here. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, this was honestly, I know a lot of people really like Pro Skater 4, a lot of people like the Underground games, and I did like them, but this is the last one that I truly loved. Pro Skater 3 was sort of, I feel for me, the last one of those classic Tony Hawks before it went open world, kind of in the same way with SSX 3. Nothing against the open world idea for these types of sports games, but I prefer the more individualized courses with specific goals rather than the giant open world form. That's just my personal preference. And this to me was the last one of those in the classic style, and definitely one of the best sports games of all time. Loved all the challenges, loved the tracks. And of course it has the classic park editor, which was a fantastic addition to it. A very great game. Coming in at number 4 is the original Tony Hawk, the PlayStation version there, and I preferred the Dreamcast version, definitely the best one with slightly updated graphics, just a little bit of an extra nudge on this one. Not heads and tails better than the original versions, but just enough extra to make it that much better. And this one, I really enjoyed the original because of the way they designed the courses. Every single course has this very downward momentum, just propels you through every single level. Even with starting with the very next entry in the series, it was a little bit more of, you go to say the school level and has very obvious segments and a little bit more realism, a little bit more, not open world, but a little bit more exploration, versus the original Tony Hawk was just forward. You just propel yourself forward, and there's lots of different ways that you can go. You can jump up and go on the escalators in the mall level and jump down and find all these secret things as you're going. But I loved that feeling of just the constant forward rush. It was really just, I don't know, I just got a big rush from this that I didn't get from the later entries, even starting with number 2. It just had this a very fun, very action-packed, very sort of like speed-oriented gameplay rather than just focusing on the tricks. And it really was unique in its level designs for that reason, because they kind of abandoned that format and never really came back to it. So I really like the original levels in this one. Again, it doesn't have quite the multiplayer content of the later editions. I do, as a one player, this is actually probably one of my favorites in the series, if not my favorite. For multiplayer, it's probably my second favorite in the series. Really great game, an amazing start to the series. It's amazing that they started off with such quality. But again, number 4 right here, the original Tony Hawk. Number 3 is Pro Skater 2, again, PlayStation version here, and the better Dreamcast version here. And this one took everything about number 1 and improved it. Again, I did say that it got rid of that sort of forward momentum style of the levels, and it did do that, but it opened up the levels enough without going open world that it actually had a little more variety and a little more fun, and you got a little more out of it. It took longer to beat it, there was more to do, there was a lot more, I think, fun for multiplayer. I definitely enjoyed, this is probably, for some reason, my favorite park editor, like map maker. I don't know why, but for some reason I really spent a lot of time with this one with friends, especially the original PlayStation version, the one we probably played the most. And just, to me, this is the ultimate classic. For some reason, just the way the tracks are designed, the way the soundtrack is, there's everything about this Tony Hawk. For me, this is the classic Tony Hawk. When I think of Tony Hawk, this is what I think of. Tony Hawk 2, my number 3 sports game of all time. Number 2 is one of the first PlayStation 2 games I ever played. It was part of that collection of games I rented from Blockbuster when I rented a PS2 for my birthday early in 2001. And that is the original SSX, one of the best, if not the best, launch game for PlayStation 2. I put it at a tie, I think, with Tekken Tag Tournament for being the best launch title. Something that I had no idea going into it what it really was, rather than, just it's a snowboarding game. didn't really know much about it. I was actually expecting something more along the lines of Cool Borders, and instead I got something that was so much better, something that, as far as the beautiful track designs, the interesting characters, and the amazing trick system, even surpassed the great Tony Hawk series. This was such an amazing game. I absolutely loved it. To this day I still play it, and it really holds up. This is such a fun game. My number 2, the original SSX.
Is that so sweet? Funky dope maneuver! Backward flip. Forward flip. Backside 360. Frontside 360.
And number 1, by a mile, for me, nothing even comes close. Not even the original SSX, not Tony Hawk 2. All great games. I've enjoyed all of them. I still play all of them, even though they're getting to be pretty old. Nothing comes close for me to SSX Tricky. This is by far my favorite sports game, and honestly one of my favorite games for the PlayStation 2. I love SSX Tricky. They took the original SSX, and it's more like, instead of being a sequel, it's more of a super mega limited edition expansion set. They took all of the tracks and characters from the first SSX release and sort of redid them all, redesigned them all, made them bigger and better and more over the top, made the characters greater, had better voice acting, they had over the top personalities, and it was so much fun. The music was better, everything about it was just better. It is, to me, the absolute sort of perfect game. Out of this entire list, this is honestly the only game that I would score a 10 out of 10. I'm not even kidding. This, to me, I cannot think of a single flaw. It is an absolute perfect game. It is so much fun. My favorite sports game of all time, and nothing will ever beat it for me. I don't think I will ever find another sports title that will even come close. It's something I still plug in and play probably every couple of months. I mean, it's a game that my wife knows very well, even though she's never played it, just from watching me play it. And everyone knows that I put in SSX Tricky, I'm going to kick your butt, because I love this game, and I've played it to death with every character. I've done absolutely everything in it. I love it, I love it. I will always enjoy this game so much. SSX Tricky just has everything that made the first one great and takes it to this next level of fun. And that, to me, is one of the most important things with games, particularly in this type of genre where it's not going to be something story-focused, obviously. It's something where it all comes down to the gameplay and the feeling of entertainment, of fun.
Welcome to SSX Tricky. I hope you're ready.